All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining the Transforming Shorelines Collaborative webinar. We'll be covering operations and maintenance of horizontal levees, lessons learned from the Oro Loma project today. Want to start with a land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Bay and the broader San Francisco Bay Estuary is the unceded ancestral territory of many Indigenous people, and we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of these tribal communities by affirming their sovereign rights as First People. And I just wanted to start with an introductory poll to understand everybody's background and how much they understand about horizontal levees. I'll just give it another few moments. All right. So it looks like we have a nice mix of people with different professional backgrounds, and it seems like everybody's pretty familiar with horizontal levees, so that's good. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. We will start off with an introduction into Oro Loma's Horizontal Levee Pilot Project, where Heidi Nutters from SFEP will be introducing that, as well as Sam English from the City of Palo Alto. And then we'll dive into a panel discussion on the lessons learned from Oro Loma about the operation and maintenance of horizontal levees. So Heidi, you can go ahead.
Great, thanks. Wonderful to see everybody here. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Heidi Nutters with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and Natalie already introduced my co-presenter, Sam Englage with the City of Palo Alto. So it's great to hear that many of you are familiar with horizontal levees, and we'll be giving an overview of just sort of some of the basics of the project and how that project has informed a pilot project that will be constructed later this year that Sam will speak to. And then we'll have a great panel to walk you through components of the manual itself. So next slide. So just to start, this definition comes from a summary report of a roundtable we did back in 2021, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. It's a great document. And so this is the working definition that we're using today. A horizontal levee is an engineered sloped subsurface treatment wetland built between coastal levees and tidal marshes. Essentially an ecotone levee that incorporates treatment of wastewater effluent or reverse osmosis concentrate can also be used as we're exploring below ground through the system. Next slide. This image here was developed by Angela Stiegler, who's on our panel. And just to sort of speak in, greater terms about, nature-based solutions and the approach to a horizontal levee. So on the left-hand side, we have kind of a conventional levee seawall that is protecting a wastewater treatment plant with some flood protection in front of it. And this type of flood protection system is sort of a one problem, one solution approach. So it's designed to provide flood protection to a certain sort of engineering criteria. And beyond that, obviously the water will sort of overtop over that seawall if it ever goes above it. And so it can be a great solution and one that we need to incorporate for, some of our infrastructure around our region. And horizontal levees present an opportunity to consider multiple benefits for these same kind of projects. So we think of it as a multi-benefit solution that can provide a range of benefits for our communities and for infrastructure. So in this case, in this visual rendering that we have here, we're incorporating that same flood wall, but we're also adding native vegetation adjacent to that levee system that's providing habitat for sensitive species. And as you can see in this image here, there's a water treatment layer that goes below ground through the system. It might not look any different to you if you're out on the site, but below ground there is activity happening to remove nutrients and other contaminants of emerging concern. I also want to acknowledge three of kind of the originators of the horizontal levee concept, which were Peter Bay, a botanist who was very instrumental in this project, Jeremy Lowe from the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and Mike Connor, who was previously with the East Bay Dischargers Authority and sadly passed away earlier this year. So I just want to acknowledge the three sort of originators of this concept within our region. Next slide. So we are going to talk a lot more about operations and maintenance of the Oro Loma horizontal levee. Hopefully many of you on this call have been out to the site, and if you haven't been, please feel free to reach out to us. We are always happy to arrange site visits. This pilot project was built in 2015 to study this concept, and like I said, the originators were very involved. And along with the partners that are listed here, you see Berkeley, Valley Water, the Oro Loma Sanitary District, San Francisco Estuary Institute, Save the Bay, EBDA, and SFEP. As we'll talk about some more, the findings from the multiple years of studying this site show significant removal of nutrients and contaminants of emerging concern from the site through below ground activity within the wetland system. Next slide. Why don't we skip past this just for the sake of time? Oh, sorry, this is a animation. So at this particular site, which is located in San Lorenzo at the Oro Loma Sanitary District, like I mentioned, this is a picture of some of the vegetation at the site. And can you want to click through this, Natalie? There are 12 treatment cells at this site as it was originally designed, and these cells all have a different combination of vegetation plantings and below ground sort of substrate. And the idea was to test sort of the nutrient treatment capacity across these different kind of combinations within the treatment cells. Next slide. The influent goes, in at the top, and then there are treatment, there's a monitoring equipment at the top, in the middle, and at the bottom of the site. And this is a closed loop system. So then at that point, the water is collected and brought back into the treatment plant to be fully treated. The fact that this is a closed loop site means that we're able to continue to test out new concepts here and really see it as a living laboratory. So we've recently reconfigured 2 of the cells to test out the use of reverse osmosis concentrate at this site. And it continues to be a place where we're able to look at nature-based solutions and nutrient management. Next slide. I hope that this QR code works for you all. If not, you can, I'll put the actual link into the chat. But this website has a compilation of most of the peer-reviewed publications that have been written about this particular site and the research that's been done here. So it's a great place to go to learn more about that. Next slide. And I'll just say that, kind of zooming out regionally, the Oro Loma Horizontal Levee is sort of the inception of many projects that are now ongoing around our region. The Estuary Partnership has partnered with and been involved with all of the folks that are shown on this map here. So we've seen a great proliferation of projects coming out of this one test site. And I'm going to hand it over to Sam English to talk about one of those pilot projects, the Palo Alto horizontal levee.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. Next slide. All right. So the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee pilot project has several goals. These include improvement of the habitat that is currently out at the project site, as well as the beginning of adapting to sea level rise, and most importantly, ensuring that whatever we build out there can be incorporated into the larger levee improvement projects that we know are coming down the pipeline in the next 10 or 20 years. We want to make sure that whatever we build out there, that it doesn't just disappear. It's going to be a permanent pilot site that we're hoping to gain a bunch of great information on, but that also continues on in the next 50 years. We also have goals that focus on ensuring public access is maintained to the site. There's an extensive trail network that we need to make sure we're connecting with on both sides of the project site. We wanted to ensure that perspectives of marginalized communities are incorporated into the social infrastructure and the educational components of the project. And then, of course, we wanted to ensure that we're getting polishing treatment of the treated wastewater that we are using for irrigation of the horizontal levee. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we want to make sure that we can collect data not only for Palo Alto to use in implementing more horizontal levees, but hopefully others in the region can use as well. Next slide. So some highlights of the project. We are going to be the first horizontal levee that is built in the Bay Area that is actually open to tidal actions in the Bay. So yay. We are actually moving forward with construction, yes, this year and hoping to break ground sometime in September. The Palo Alto project implements several estuary blueprint tasks, including 3.1, 4.1, and 4.2. And these are tasks that focus on design and implementation of nature-based shoreline adaptation projects. We're hoping to pave the way and provide data and support for other horizontal levee projects, not just locally, but regionally. And of course, we want to acknowledge the fact that the Palo Alto project in particular would not have happened without generous grants from EPA as well as the State Coastal Conservancy. Next slide. So the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee Pilot Project used several things from Oro Loma and learned a lot from the Oro Loma project, some of which are posted here on the slide, and I'll go over at a very high level. We did learn a lot about flow regimes and how to simplify for our particular needs for this project. We relied heavily on the Oro Loma water quality data to let our resource agencies know and assure them that this project isn't going to pose any danger to the environment or to public health. We got a lot of great information on the plant palette, and in particular, which plants grew too well and which ones to kind of plant very sparsely because they're just great with the wastewater. We use the Oro Lomo site to create field trips for our community so that they could better understand what we were proposing to build and understand why it would be such a great asset to build within their own community. We also took advantage of the community partnerships that Oro Loma started. For example, Save the Bay grew and planted the native plants out at Oro Loma, and we hired them to do the same at Palo Alto because we want to take advantage of all the lessons that they learned from their participation in that project as well. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we're hoping to learn a lot about the ongoing maintenance and adaptive management of horizontal levees from Oro Loma. so that we can really get a better sense of budgeting and staffing and planning at this time for maintenance of the levee that we're going to have to do in the very near future. Next slide, please. So that's a great segue into why really you guys are here. So the operations and maintenance manual of horizontal levees, lessons learned for the Oro Loma Pilot Project was recently released. It contains a lot of great information on maintenance requirements for the vegetation, the water treatment system, the habitat value, ensuring public health and safety, as well as the horizontal levee slope over time. And so with that, I'd like to pass it back over to Heidi for the panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam. And that was a great overview of Palo Alto and segue into the panel itself. So I also just put a link to the O&M manual in the chat if you want to take a look at it while we're talking. So the idea behind the structure of this panel is that it will kind of walk you through some of the key components of what's in the manual while the panelists are sort of answering questions. So we have a really great panel. It is made up of some of the graduate students, current and former, who were involved at the Oro Loma Horizontal Levee site, as well as Jimmy Dang, who is the Oro Loma Sanitary District General Manager. So first, we're going to have the panelists all introduce themselves and speak a little bit to their role on the project and their role today. And then we will have a facilitated discussion. I welcome you to put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them while we're walking through the discussion. So I'm just going to start with the order that we have on the slide here. So Anthony, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony DeSalvo, and I'm a fifth-year graduate student, PhD student at UC Berkeley, working with Dr. David Sedlak on the horizontal levee. A lot of my research focuses on the fate of PFAS and PFAS precursors as they move through the horizontal levee through this newly reconstructed section of it. I'm sure we'll get into more detail later. Looking forward to speaking with you all.
Thank you. And Angela?
Hi, folks. I'm Angela Stigler, and I spent 2016 through 2022 as a graduate student at UC Berkeley, focusing on water quality benefits of horizontal levees. I helped to kick off the Oro concentrate work on site in 2020 through 2022 and collect a lot of the water quality data that's come out since then. And I also want to highlight that while I was a graduate student, I got to kind of like work more broadly in the region to, I guess, bring horizontal levees about and like presentations to the water boards and things like that. So that was a great part of my experience. And bigger picture now, I'm a consultant at Hazen and Sawyer, and I'm really passionate about bringing innovative water quality solutions like nature-based solutions to practice. So I'm getting to do that now in the real world. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Jonathan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan. I'm a fifth-year graduate student in environmental engineering at UC Berkeley. My PhD work focuses on the fate of trace metals, specifically copper, nickel, and zinc, flowing through the horizontal levee using both treated wastewater and the reverse osmosis concentrate. I do this by measuring metals flowing in the water through that subsurface treatment layer, but I also characterize the metals associated with the sediments to better understand retention and removal mechanisms.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Jimmy?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jimmy Dang. I'm the general manager at Oro Loma Sanitary District. During the time that the horizontal levee 1.0 was built, probably 10 years ago, I was in the engineering department, part of that team, constructing that experimental levee, which I'm very happy to be a part of. Now I'm not so much in engineering, more on the administrative side, but still happy to support this wonderful collaborative project.
Thanks, Jimmy. And last but not least, Aiden.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Aiden Chichetti. I'm currently a staff engineer with the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board, where I work in our municipal stormwater programs. Before I joined the water boards, I completed my PhD with David Sedlak at UC Berkeley between 2015 and 2020. And my research was focused on nutrient cycling in the Oro Loma Pilot Horizontal Levee project.
Thank you so much, Aiden. Great. So, and that's timely because I'm going to start with Aiden for our first question on the panel. And that is, what are some of the key takeaways from your experience in the field at Oro Loma about operating and maintaining the horizontal levees' ability to improve water quality? And I see Chris's question about the flow rate of the horizontal levee as well. So if you're able to address that, that would be great as well.
Yeah, so I would say the question about flow rates is appropriate because one of the most important and enduring takeaways from our research was that maintaining the appropriate hydraulic conditions in horizontal levees is essential for seeing the water quality improvements. Specifically, our research indicated that rapid removal of most contaminants, including nutrients, is achieved when water flows through subsurface treatment layers. Whereas if you get water flowing over the surface of the levees, it receives minimal treatment and it effectively short circuits contaminants from the influent to the discharge point at the end. So really the key operational and maintenance concerns are making sure that influent flow being applied to the system is going to be conveyed through the subsurface without bubbling up over the surface. And that can change over time based on a variety of factors.
Great. Thank you so much, Aiden. Okay, so does anybody else want to add anything about that on the panel? Okay, then I'll go to the next question. And this one, I think I'll start with Jimmy for. How does operating and maintaining the horizontal levee compare with operating and maintaining other parts of the wastewater treatment plant? And maybe you can also speak to maintaining the vegetation at Oro Loma over time.
Sure. Operating and maintaining the horizontal levee, I would say, is much simpler when comparing it to other parts of the treatment plant. I'm not necessarily speaking about the chemistry or the biology or anything like that, just more on the physical O&M side of things. Most of our operations at the treatment plant does involves anything that has moving parts, right? You're talking about pumps, valves, motors, electrical gear. The more you have, the more attention you have to pay to them. At the levee, we have a couple of small pumps, a couple of valves, and a bunch of flow meters. So it's much simpler, I would say, when you compare it to an entire treatment plant. As far as the vegetation goes, we've had two issues. Well, I don't know if you call them issues, but definitely things that we contended with. One was keeping on top of invasive species. In our particular case, it was pampas grass. We had to remove those by hand, according to the experts that told us we couldn't go in there with any equipment. And I believe we did that on more than one occasion. The other challenge we had was over at the Willows, where we have this perforated pipe feeding into that part of the levee. The roots really love that water and chase the water up through the cloth barrier that surrounded the pipe and into the actual perforations into the pipe, and then end up clogging the pipe. So we have to dig it up, pull all the roots out, and then put it back in place. But for the most part, I would say our O&M staff, operation staff, does one round around it once a day just to make sure nothing's broken, nothing's leaking. And as far as maintenance goes, there isn't really much there.
Great, that's super helpful. And Jimmy, while I have you, I wonder if we could address the question in the chat from Sam Cohen, the level of treatment that's offered through the levee. Can you just speak to that as well? So I think it's, go ahead.
Yeah. What I know, the idea is to treat nutrients and remove contaminants. I think the UC Berkeley students probably be better at answering that question. But as far as loading or treatment rates, we're daily putting about 50,000 gallons across the entire levee a day.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo that too. There's a bunch of details about removal rates or loading in one of our open access papers, which we can put in the chat if you're interested in those details. And that's under the horizontal levee 1.0 design, treated wastewater from Oro Loma before they underwent their massive nutrient upgrades on site. So we had more loading of nutrients at that time. And so there's been some design changes in a 2.0 configuration where we're getting more loading of water and contaminants into the system, and looking at RO concentrate, there's of course more loading coming in. And so there's some interesting kind of data and learnings that happen in each of those kind of scenarios I wanted to highlight. But we can put that publication in the chat so that you can have the exact numbers as well. I don't know if Aiden has them memorized on the top of his head. I know I don't.
Great, that's super helpful. Thanks, Angela. And the next question is actually for you. The underground part of the horizontal levee, as Aiden spoke to, is where the water treatment happens. Is anything needed to maintain the soil media's ability to provide effective treatment over time?
Sure. Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions about the horizontal levee because we get it a lot, especially when we give presentations about nitrate removal in the subsurface. So those who are familiar with nitrate removal in systems like this usually requires a source of carbon for the microbes to break down that nitrate. And we added wood chips to the subsurface. So one might think, okay, those wood chips will break down over time and you might run out. But it turns out that wetlands are quite advantageous for this process because the roots provide a reliable, renewable source of carbon to the subsurface. And the amount of carbon that we added was like enough to sustain treatment over 50 years without the plant roots adding additional carbon into the subsurface. So for nutrients, there's not really anything needed to maintain that performance. We also notably didn't see any evidence of clogging or the hydraulics kind of getting messed up over time, which is nice. We don't think you have to go in and kind of backflush the system, things like that. And that makes sense because we're putting in treated wastewater or relatively, low solids water into the system. I don't know if others have things they want to add to that as well.
I guess I can
Go ahead, Anthony.
add a little bit, speaking about PFAS removal. And so when we're looking at these systems, when it comes to contaminants of emerging concern, there are times, like with a lot of Angela's work, where trace organics can be removed via biological processes in that subsurface. And there are other times when they can't, such as the case with PFAS or per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, which are notoriously difficult to break down. So in this case, we reconstructed a section of the levee to add what we call geomedia sorbents. This is just activated carbon filters, essentially, in that subsurface. And that is a part that would need to be replaced periodically to maintain that ability to remove things like PFAS. And so I just wanted to drop that little tidbit in there. That's a little bit extra maintenance, but that's, going a little bit above and beyond when it comes to tertiary wastewater treatment or wastewater polishing.
Thank you. Anthony, the next question is for you. After 1 decade of studying and operating the Oro Loma horizontal levee, are there still knowledge needs about operating and maintaining these systems over the long term? If so, what are your initial thoughts? And then I'll open it up to the rest of the panel to add their thoughts as well.
Yeah, as a researcher, there's always a million more questions that we can answer about the real nitty-gritty academics of the system. I see Angela laughing because she totally gets it. But when it comes to real practical things that we're concerned with on a day-to-day basis, I think studying the habitat capacity of the system is going to be really important to see in these new larger scale horizontal levees, seeing how wildlife and shoreline coastal life, flora and fauna adapt to this system being present at that larger scale. And like right up against the shoreline is going to be really important to see, because obviously that's important to a lot of groups in the area. So yeah, that's the big one that stands out to me, but I'd love to hear from others what they think as well.
I would add the practical element of the integration with the bay itself, and Palo Alto is going to test that. So that's an exciting development there.
Thanks. So just a couple questions in the chat from Kate about the Army Corps permitting. I think, thank you, Sam, for putting information about the Palo Alto project in there. I think that's probably the most relevant example for permitting. Since this project was closed loop and not directly on the shoreline. So thanks for adding that. There's also a question of from Jeanette, are findings available yet for reverse osmosis concentrate treatment through the levee? Do we have any publications we can share about that yet?
This is a delinquent last chapter of my dissertation, which I apologize for all of you on, but it's possible Valley Water has put out some data. I'm not quite sure. They may have also put some things out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe we can follow up with them, and if there's something that we're able to share with the attendees, we definitely will. We also have a question from Melissa Gunter. Hi, good to see you, Melissa. This is a little bit beyond my technical skills. Does anybody can address this question on the panel?
Jono, this might be you. I think.
Well, yeah, so what I will say is that is a potential side effect of sulfate reducing conditions is the methylation of mercury. However, we don't have the capacity to currently measure mercury. But one fortunate thing about treated municipal wastewater is that it tends to not have super high concentrations of mercury already to begin with. But in regions where you might have some sort of source that does have higher levels of mercury, that might be something to consider. But as long as if you want to prevent the onset of sulfate reduction, one way to do that is just to ensure that nitrate is present throughout the entire system. So there is a way to design a levee to essentially get 100% removal of nitrate right at the end of the levee. And then in that case, you might be minimizing the onset of sulfate reduction. However, you could have pockets, of course, in the treatment layer that could promote that. Angela, do you have any other insight you want to add?
I guess the only other thing I'd add is to the first part of your question, Melissa, that those iron and sulfate reducing conditions are important for removing pharmaceutical compounds, which was one of the main findings of my PhD work. So if that's important, it's kind of this trade-off that you'd have to consider. And I think methylmercury is probably a higher priority if you have a high level of mercury in your water. So I would lean towards not promoting those conditions if that's an issue in your specific case.
And then just going off of Angela one more time, same thing with by keeping nitrate in the system up until the end, you could also, if you do have high iron content in your treatment layer sediments, that iron as well could prevent the onset of entirely sulfate reducing conditions.
Thank you all for that feedback. Yeah, and I was also thinking about just the mercury TMDL in the bay, and if like anything would, if formed substrate or then being transported out into the bay more so than say the influent having mercury. But thank you so much for the feedback.
Thank you. So there was a question about interactions with airports, which I actually was going to ask Sam to answer. So thank you for answering that in the chat, Sam. And then there's also a question on a follow-up, another question on the Palo Alto project. So I don't know, Sam, if you would be up for answering this one. What elevation ranges are most appropriate for treatment beds relative to mean high water, and how is the Palo Alto project planning for sea level rise with tidal inundation?
Boy.
Just a small question, just a little one.
Yeah. So this one I have to dig into the drawings a bit and like the pre-design evaluations. What elevation ranges are most appropriate for treatment beds relatives? Okay. I'm gonna punt on this one and see if I can't find something in our files while you guys continue the panel discussion. There's not a clear-cut, easy answer to that right now. I think the unsatisfactory answer at this point is that the majority of the horizontal levee that we are building in Palo Alto is above the tidal line right now. But we did do some evaluations to look at what, like where the mean high water level will be in 20, 50 years from now. I just need to dig that back up.
Thank you, Sam. So I have another question going back to the panel, and this one's, I'm going to start with Angela on this one. What is a good recipe for success for components that could be front-loaded in a design to have good operations and maintenance outcomes? And I just want to emphasize that for a lot of the folks that we've worked with at treatment plants around the region, concerns about O&M can play a big role as a kind of barrier to entry for these types of projects. So I think this question will be of interest to a lot of folks on the call. So Angela, maybe you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, sure. Something that I think would be really, really great for ensuring successful outcomes for future horizontal levees is having great interdisciplinary engineering teams working on the design. So thoughtful design from the beginning. Some of the issues that came up were a result of the design being an experiment, like pampas grass liked growing in gravelly areas that wouldn't necessarily be present in a full-scale system. But just like designing a full-scale wastewater treatment plant where you have an electrical team and you have your civil team and you have all the folks kind of coming together, I think that eventual implementation of full-scale horizontal levees will require similar teaming efforts where we have experts on the pumps and the pipes and the conveyance, and as well as the habitat experts who will understand how to plant plants under these salinity conditions and things like that. So that's something that I would love to see in like the big horizontal levees that get built in the bay in the coming years as we kind of scale things up.
Thank
I could also
you.
add off of Angela. I think just investing in some really high quality flow meters also is really great. That with user-friendly software as well as real-time data visibility. So you could quickly just know exactly how much flow is coming into your cell with a software that's intuitive and easy for most people to operate.
Yeah, actually, and that point, Jono, I think highlights something that I don't know. We have to think about these as treatment systems, and so just because they're passive doesn't mean that they don't require monitoring and operation and a careful look. Even though they're easier, like we still need the data that we would need in like understanding your flow in your wastewater plant. Like you would never, I'm sure Jimmy would never want to not know the flow going into his clarifiers or something. So.
Great, thank you. There's another question from Ellen in the chat that I'm not sure if anybody has an answer to, but Ellen's asking if we can speak to any prior or planned work on pesticide removal by horizontal levees. I'm assuming you mean like below ground through the system? Does anybody have anything they want to, Ellen, do you want to speak to your question?
Yeah. Pesticides, there's another class of CECs that is of concern in terms of toxicity to wildlife in San Francisco Bay, and it is present in municipal wastewater and is currently not removed by treatment processes. So I was just curious I don't think in the existing published research there's anything on pesticides. More wondering if there's anything planned for that in the future. It's an area of interest for us.
Yeah, I'm not sure about future direction, but it's good feedback that that's something you all are interested in. But I do know that we collected a very limited data set of like fipronil concentrations in our concentrate work. So that is in my last chapter that I mentioned being unpublished, but hope to share that data. But there's a caveat there in that because it wasn't included from the very start, we have less of an understanding of the mechanism through which fipronil is removed. We just have some data about its removal because we didn't, monitor it over time and say, oh, it didn't break through the system. Like those kinds of questions that we addressed kind of are still open, but there's some data.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions for the panel, and feel free to keep adding questions in the chat. What practical observations, and I'm going to start with Jonathan on this one. What practical observations have you experienced working on the Oro Loma Horizontal Levee project that affected the way you were monitoring or maintaining the site?
Yeah, so one very practical lesson is that if water isn't flowing, you won't be able to monitor anything. So the treatment layer itself hasn't given us any trouble when it comes to clogging, but we have had issues with the plumbing that conveys the water to the system. So I think just being aware of where the potential clogging could occur, and having a regular maintenance or checking of those potential clogging spots would be very beneficial. We recently found that the tank that holds the RO concentrate itself was actually clogged. Like a layer of solids was settling on the bottom, and it was clogging the plumbing that was conveying the water to the system. And we weren't aware of that for a few months. So just, I think, really understanding the plumbing of the system that conveys the water to the levee is very important to understand. And then also just ensuring that you are, once the water is in the system, that it is being maintained in the subsurface. We have come out on some occasion and have noticed some pooling near the end of the levees. And if you're having surface flow, like Aiden said, you won't be getting that treatment that you would like to see when it comes to the nutrients.
Great, thank you, Jono. Okay, Jimmy, I'm going to start with you on this one. What is one design or early planning decision that you wished you had done differently from an O&M perspective? What advice would you give to a wastewater treatment plant operator who is thinking about building a horizontal levee connected to their treatment plant?
Yeah, I think Jono and Angela touched on the flow monitoring devices and making sure, the software is easily usable, things like that. Mine is more on the physical side of things. If you're going to put flow meters in, don't bury them deep in the ground like we did on our experimental levee. In our case, we installed them fairly deep in the soil and installed pull boxes with many extensions on the pull boxes. So even if you had to get access, well, we thought they'll give you access to those flow meters in case you need to change them out or anything, but they were so deep in the pull boxes, you couldn't even reach in there with arm's length to get access to them. So that makes it very difficult to maintain and change out. So in the future, I would say, if you had to have a flow meter that deep, just due to hydraulic reasons, make sure that any displays or HMI portions of those meters or monitoring devices are above grade or somewhere accessible. So you don't actually have to go deep down, below grade to maintain those things. The other thing I would say is, and I think someone touched on this already, our levee is a closed system on our treatment plant. So a lot of the maintenance items that we were able to deal with were much easier because we didn't have to necessarily deal with the sensitive, butting up right against the bay, in which case, you have permitting agencies and all these other groups that may prevent you from going in there and performing any real maintenance activities once you have this levee built. So I would say that would be the second thing to consider going into the future when you're designing that. But biggest thing for me is, one thing is to make sure that any equipment you put in there is accessible.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists want to add anything to that? And I would add Sam to that if you have any lessons learned from our design process so far.
If I could jump in for a second, I would say to be very intentional about your goals with your design, because I think if you're designing a horizontal levee with the primary goal of habitat restoration and shoreline adaptation, you're not as worried about those water quality benefits. That project is going to look quite a bit different than if you're trying to treat something like reverse osmosis concentrate, which is going to look a whole lot different separately from if you're just trying to treat treated wastewater. And so keeping things in mind of like where you're going to put your monitoring sites for your water quality benefits, how often you're going to be doing species surveys and things like that. Those different elements are going to have a lot different weights depending on what your goals are. So I would say defining those well ahead of time is pretty critical.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Any other questions from the folks on the Zoom today? I think I answered all the questions on the chat. I was trying to keep up. Oh, I see one from Christina. Oh, a couple more coming in, sorry. Okay, let's start with the Christina Tom's question. Were there any settling consolidation of horizontal levee materials over time in locations where horizontal levees may be built on top of compressible bay muds? How are geotechnical considerations being incorporated into design? Anybody want to take that one on the panel?
I will attempt it with the big caveat that I don't think any of us are geotechnical engineers, Christina, but it is a great question. And this is something that, I said I'm interested in like horizontal levee implementation. So I've been talking to some of our geotechnical engineers at Hazen and presenting this concept to them. They're like, "Oh, this is really interesting. This could work." So that at least gives me a gut check that like I'm not totally off base with this kind of approach. But I will add that in terms of the compressible bay muds question, to the design does have if it's a water treatment horizontal levee, there's intended to be a compacted clay liner under the system. So of course that would have to be kind of considered with the geotechnical like capability or compatibility with the area as well. I hope that was satisfactory for your question. But
I can add a little bit to that. During construction of our horizontal levee 1.0, at Oro Loma, we also had an EQ basin kind of built adjacent to the horizontal levee. And at the top of that levee, we actually had to preload the soil per the geotechnical engineer. So we put layers on top, let it sit for some time as prescribed, and then we would build on top of that and let it sit again. So that's how we did it. I'm assuming that's probably how you would do it when you build it out, and anywhere else on top of bay mud.
Yeah, and to build on both of those answers just a little bit, the pilot system at Oro Loma wasn't necessarily the perfect place to test this question because a lot of the plants were being removed, not necessarily harvested, but they weren't all just falling down onto the surface and building up over time. Now, that said, they did fall on the surface and build up very rapidly. So I think the questions about sea level rise and the elevation of the surface of the levee over time, you would probably actually see an increase in the elevation that might end up offsetting that. But unfortunately, we didn't really have the capability to study that just because of the way the system's set up and how it needed to be managed.
Thanks, Aiden. And I see that Sam Englage added a comment in the chat, and I just want to really emphasize how much monitoring the city of Palo Alto is doing at this site post-construction, prior to really to understand and continue to advance our understanding of horizontal levees as that project is built. So hopefully we can update you all on some of those findings as we get them. So there's another question from Heath Coles about retrofitting or upgrading horizontal levees for different treatment purposes. There's an example in the chat about, making adjustments to design for future infrastructure upgrades. I know that this is something we talked about, actually, the panel discussed in our prep call for this, but does anybody want to take this on? I'll just say that from my perspective, I think that this is going to be a really interesting question as we move into seeing these projects get built out on the shoreline, like at Palo Alto. At Oro Loma, we do have these 12 treatment cells that can continue to be reconfigured over time for us to continue to ask different questions. But at a site like at Palo Alto, we are, putting this piping equipment below ground on, on the shoreline in areas where there are sensitive species. And so I actually don't have a great answer for this question. I think it'll be something that we'll have to address in terms of how do we maintain and what are the limitations for upgrading the site in the future. Angela, do you want to add something? I saw you go off mute.
Yeah, I think the nature of this question too is kind of asking, like, if you're initially just building it as a slope surface versus you want the water quality benefits and in the future. And what I would say to that is you've really got to have a porous media subsurface treatment layer to get any of that water quality benefit. So if that's something you anticipate in the future, it would be prudent to incorporate that into the design before, in the early days, in case you want to be adding water to that. You could still irrigate the surface if you're not interested in that benefit in the initial stages to establish the plant community, but I think you'd have to dig it up to like add that treatment layer underground, and I think that would not be an outcome you would really want to do.
Yeah, thanks. So the next question is about PFAS, what is the fate of those removed materials and the persistence of PFAS over time? Anthony?
Yeah, I can hop in on that. That's probably the most common question that I get asked is, what are we going to do with this activated carbon that gets laden with PFAS over time in the subsurface? And the very simple answer is that you would have to dig it up. It's unfortunate, but eventually you will get saturation of PFAS with any sorbent media that you were to put in a horizontal levee. And we've started to think about, in my research, some different ways to kind of prolong the lifetime of a horizontal levee or make that removal a bit more efficient. At the moment, what we've done in this, we refer to this newly reconstructed section. It's a small subsection of the horizontal levee where we're testing these geomedia. And at the moment, we've got activated carbon and another sorbent called fluorosorb. Those are things that you just use to stick PFAS out of water, essentially. And right now they're homogenously like rototilled into this gravel treatment zone where most of our water flows. And so that makes it really difficult because you'd have to dig out the entire subsurface to be able to gain any more PFAS removal benefit after it's been saturated, which at the moment is probably a handful of years until we reach complete saturation. So one suggestion that we've been thinking about over time is that, maybe you could take a higher concentration plug of, an activated carbon or another sorbent and put it at the very bottom of your treatment zone, or furthest down slope, that is, so that you get water quality benefits beforehand, which might enhance your absorption potential, or the amount of time before you hit that saturation. And then down the road, when you do need to replace that material and, landfill or incinerate, dispose of the rest, it's only that one small subsection that you have to take care of versus the entire length of the slope. But that's a question we're hoping to get a bit deeper into. Hopefully a year or so from now, we'll have a publication on something like that.
Great, thank you. And we'll make sure to update our website with any new publications as they become available. I do want to keep us on time. I'm trying to keep track of the chat. Anything that we don't answer, we'll try to follow up on in our summary report for this. I just want to thank Mehdi Sanaki from Valley Water, who added some comments about some of the findings that Valley Water has seen on reverse osmosis concentrate in the chat. Thank you so much for adding that. And sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but it's really wonderful to see all of the interest in the project. I'm going to hand it back to Natalie, and also thank the panel for your many, many years of work that have gone into what you're sharing with us all today. Mehdi, I'm sorry, Mehdi, did you want to add anything? I saw you turn your video on, so I just want to make sure you can speak up if you'd like to add something.
No, just wanted to thank the panel and all the participants, and many of you have been involved helping us out to figure this, holy grail of our concentrate. So I appreciate everyone's collective input and assistance in this great project.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just, to Sam's last question about how do we do more of this, the Estuary Partnership works on these projects all over the region, so can continue to engage with this group, and feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to chat more about that. So thank you. Huge thanks to the panel for your contributions, and I'm going to hand it back to Natalie to finish us off here.
All right, thank you, Heidi. And yeah, again, I want to echo thank you to the panelists for sharing your expertise. As Heidi said, SFEP will report back on the Palo Alto Horizontal Levee progress. And if you'd like to subscribe to be updated on all Transforming Shorelines Collaborative meetings, here is the form to do so. We'll be having a collaborative meeting at the beginning of next year about Palo Alto. And then I just want to close off with a poll. Just if you're interested in any other meeting topics that you'd want to see the collaborative do in the future, we'd love to hear from you and cover those. And yeah, thank you all so much.